Gar Nervod. I am Tad Larkin, the Lore Master of Mandalore, and today I'll be digging through the archives to elaborate on the venerable Rogue Squadron.
Throughout the entirety of galactic military history, I cannot think of one unit more decorated, more celebrated, or more iconic than that of Rogue Squadron, the famous X-Wing pilots of the Rebel Alliance and later the New Republic. Rogue Squadron was born in the crucible of the Battle of Yavin, when the Rebel Incom T-65 X-Wing pilots of what was then Red Squadron descended into the trenches of the first Death Star to land in an almost impossible shot on a 2-meter wide exhaust port, which destroyed the station moments before its super laser could destroy their HQ on Yavin's fourth moon. Corellian native Wedge Antilles, callsign Red 2, and Tatooine native Luke Skywalker, callsign Red 5, were the only two survivors of Red Squadron, so they were placed under Commander Arhul Nara of Renegade Flight, who promptly created a second flight named Rogue Flight. In recognition for his outstanding piloting and sinking the shot that destroyed the Death Star, as well as flying a few recon missions after the Battle of Yavin to assist in locating a new base, Luke Skywalker was given leadership of Rogue Flight, with Wedge Antilles as his second in command, and a handful of capable pilots such as Wes Jansen and Derek Hobby Clavian soon joined the Rogue's ranks. 6 standard months after the Battle of Yavin, the Imperial blockade of the Gordian Reach sector came to a close, as Darth Vader, in his new Super Star Destroyer flagship, the Executor, launched an all-out assault on the Rebel base, and with the help of Rogue Flight, the Alliance was able to successfully evacuate. Rogue Flight's next assignment brought them to Imperial-occupied Dantooine, where they were tasked with recovering Tycho Celchu, an Imperial officer of Alderaanian origin who wished to defect following the destruction of his home world, as well as provide key intel on a new Imperial Special Forces agency. The extraction didn't go as smoothly as planned. Tycho was found out and detained, requiring Skywalker and the Rogues to fight their way through the new elite Storm Commandos, and after recovering Tycho, they barely made it off the planet alive. Celchu revealed that the Storm Commandos were created to find and acquire new technologies for the Empire, and had been kidnapping scientists in the recent weeks. He also had it on good faith that their next target was a group of scientists on Raltier, which had been under an Imperial blockade since before the Battle of Yavin. While the Rogues were primarily an X-Wing flight, given their overall piloting prowess, they often rotated craft depending on mission parameters, and were more often than not treated as lab rodents for testing new fighter craft. This time, piloting T-47 airspeeders, Rogue Flight dodged orbital fire and Imperial ground troops on Raltier, with Skywalker at one point commandeering an AT-ST to escort scientists to an awaiting CR-90 Corvette, where, after fending off a subsequent Imperial boarding action, they managed to get the scientists safely off Raltier. The Raltier mission didn't go without casualties for the Rogues, however, as Lieutenant Sarkley was captured by a unit of Storm Commandos, but it was later revealed that Sarkley willingly surrendered and subsequently defected, joining the Imperial ranks alongside his uncle, Captain Firmus Piet. In the Ison corridor, Rogue Flight held the important task of escorting a construction convoy on its way from the Gordian Reach sector to the barren ice world of Hoth to begin the construction of a new Rebel base, and in an impromptu field test of the new RZ-A1 A-Wing interceptor, the Rogues blasted away TIE fighters while navigating through space debris and a large nebula, before the convoy could finally return to hyperspace with all obstructions out of the way. During some off-duty R&R on Tatooine, the Empire was tipped off that Skywalker and his flight were back on his home planet, and conducted a raid on civilian moisture farms to draw them out. They underestimated the Rogues, though, and they managed to defend Mos Eisley and drive off the Imperials. On Barkesh, the Rogues accompanied another supply convoy, this time planet-side, picking off scores of TIE fighters and TIE bombers attempting to harass the convoy, but with their help, the supplies made it to an awaiting shuttle. 7 months after the Battle of Yavin, Rogue Flight joined with Commander Nara's flight to scout out the world of Lubang Minor for a potential Alliance listening post. However, the Empire caught wind of what was going on and sent their own scouting party. In an unlikely occurrence, a clone trooper, BL-1707, who had been missing in action since a past battle left him stranded on Lumbang Minor back during the Clone Wars, came to the Rogue's aid after seeing Skywalker with his lightsaber and recognizing him as a Jedi. In the midst of repeatedly explaining to the trooper, now nicknamed Abel, that he wasn't a general like his forebearers of old, Luke filled him in on what had happened in the 2 decades since he had been stranded on the planet, and convinced Abel to join the Alliance to restore the Republic as a commando. On a subsequent mission to escort Princess Leia Organa to meet up with a group of rebels on Jabiim to convince them to join the Alliance, the Rogues got another blast from the past, when Luke was recognized as the son of Anakin Skywalker, who, 20 years earlier, had left the Jabiimai Republic loyalists to fend for themselves against the Separatists and their droid armies, after evacuating his clone troops in the aftermath of a disastrous battle. The presence of Skywalker almost caused a diplomatic breakdown. However, a renewed Imperial assault forced them to work together, and Luke would have redeemed his family name had it not been for a traitor amongst the Jabiimai that sold out his comrades to the Empire, and thousands of Jabiimai were loaded onto slave ships headed for labor camps on Callist 6. Though Luke, Leia, and the Rogues managed to make it off Jabiim, one rebel mathematician, Joran Saul, was captured and taken to Callist 6 with the rest of the Jabiimai, so they needed to spring him from captivity before he could reveal the complex algorithms used by the Alliance fleet to jump from system to system while avoiding Imperial detection. The Rogues staged an attack on the Imperial tanker Nuna's Twins, while Luke, Abel, and a team of intel officers boarded and commandeered the vessel, where they in turn disguised themselves as Imperial officers and stormtroopers to recover Joran Saul, and while the Rogues provided air cover, Luke and his team stole an Acclamator transport to bring the captured Jabiimai rebels with them. At this point in the war, the Yavin base was long abandoned and the Hoth base was still under construction, so the Rebel Alliance fleet was enacting a stateless strategy and coordinating operations from their flagship, the converted Providence-class cruiser, Rebel 1. Unbeknownst to the Rogues, the Imperials had tortured and turned Joran into a sleeper cell, so as soon as he was brought back to Rebel 1, he attempted to kill the Rebel High Command, and immediately signaled the fleet's location at Deep Space Besh to his Imperial masters. Caught off guard by a massive Imperial fleet commanded by Vader, Rogue Flight fought valiantly to buy time for the Rebel fleet to scatter, jumping to random locations in hyperspace to rejoin later. A year after the Battle of Yavin, Rogue Flight raced Imperial forces to the wreck of a vessel called the Nona on Chorax, which had been carrying stolen Imperial equipment and Rebel personnel, and after fighting off TIE fighters and ground troops, the Rogues managed to get the personnel and equipment off-world. Just like Tycho Selchu, who by this point was already an accomplished pilot within the Rogues, Rogue Flight found themselves extracting another Imperial officer, wishing to defect to the Rebels. This time, Crix Madine, the man behind the creation of the Storm Commandos, needed extraction on Corellia, and with the help of Han Solo and Chewbacca, they got him safely off-world. At Gerard 5, Rogue Flight worked in tandem with the Y-Wing bombers of Gold Squadron to aid the world in gaining their independence from Imperial rule, and while the Y-Wings took care of Imperial ground troops, the Rogues fought off the 128th TIE Interceptor Squadron, capturing their commander, Kaysen Moore, who bargained with them in exchange for her life and a place amongst the rebels. Moore referred them to the Jade Moon of Lorinar, where an Imperial supply depot was ripe for the taking, so Rogue Flight provided air support for now General Madine's commandos to infiltrate the facility and take it out. With the success of the Jade Moon operation, Kaysen Moore proved herself worthy of the Rogues' trust, and soon followed her to Balmorra, where, once again flying T-47 airspeeders, they crippled the Empire's production of AT-AT walkers. Acting again on Moore's intel, Luke Skywalker led the Rogues to an Imperial enclave on Kyle 2, and while they managed to disrupt the Empire's foothold within the Jospro sector, 2 Rogues were shot down, including Wedge Antilles, who was captured and brought to the spice mines of Kessel. Skywalker led the rogues to Kessel in their search for Wedge, and recovered him after targeting an armored hover train transporting him to the complex. However, Wedge's inside intel suggested that more rebels were being brought to the spice mines, so they once again partnered with Madine's commandos and destroyed the base shield generator to allow for prisoner extraction. With Rogue Flight now back to full strength, their next campaign was against Imperial Moff Cole Searden, who was consolidating his forces to attempt to cut off the supply of Bacta to the rebels by taking Thyfera, so they decided to disrupt his supply of Tabana gas, crucial to ammunition stores, by striking the world of Talaran. Following the strike at Talaran, a group of rebel commandos managed to capture some AT-PTs on Fest, but were cut off and required immediate assistance, so Rogue Flight swooped in and provided some much-needed air support, allowing them to get to their awaiting transports. In retaliation for rebel raids on Talaran and Fest, Moff Searden chose to punish the rebels by bombarding Chandrila, homeworld of Alliance Commander-in-Chief Mon Mothma, and cutting off supplies to the world's major settlements. The rogues escorted a hover train carrying vital supplies to the city of Nayli, and after, cleared the skies as well as assisted ground operations for Allied shuttles to clear Nayli airspace. In their own retaliation for Chandrila, the rogues struck the Imperial base on Sullust, knocking out a geothermal energy capacitor that supplied power to the facility and weakened the Imperial presence on the world. As successful as the Sullust raid was, it was ultimately a ruse to distract the rogues while Moff Searden made his move on Thyfera, so they rushed to the back-to-producing world to liberate it, and just as the battle seemed won, Moff Searden himself entered the battle in a modified Sentinel-class transport and engaged Skywalker. However, his slow, lumbering craft was no match for Luke's nimble X-Wing. In 3 ABY, the rebels suffered a disastrous defeat at Dara 4, and among the casualties were Commander Arhul Nara and Renegade Flight. So, with their commanding officer KIA and the whole other flight of the group destroyed, Rogue Flight was expanded into a full-fledged 12-fighter squadron, and Luke Skywalker was promoted to Squadron Commander. This came just in time for the Empire's infamous assault on the rebel base at Hoth, where Skywalker commanded Rogue Group, comprised of Rogue Squadron, Blue Squadron, and Green Squadron. As the Empire commenced their ground assault, rebel Gallifrey GR-75 transports were loaded up and, under the cover of ion fire, sped past the Imperial fleet. Meanwhile, Rogue Group, flying T-47 airspeeders modified for Hoth's frigid temperatures, were to assist ground troops at Outpost Beta in covering the retreat. Employing tactics they utilized at Raltier and Fest, the rogues found it more effective to use the T-47's tow cables to tie the legs of the massive Imperial AT-ATs and trip them. Unluckily for the rogues, however, the AT-ATs had gotten better at being able to shoot their airspeeders out of the sky, and several casualties were suffered, including Luke's co-pilot Dak Ralter when his speeder went down. With the base shield destroyed and Imperial troops now entering Echo Base, Luke managed to rendezvous with the rogues and hopped into his X-Wing to help escort the remaining transports past the Imperial fleet. Luke split off from the squadron to travel to Dagobah on his search for Yoda, who would in turn instruct him in the ways of the Jedi. Meanwhile, Wedge assumed command of the rogues. While Rogue Squadron suffered many casualties during the disastrous Battle of Hoth, there was one casualty that was misreported. For whatever reason, Wes Jansen was marked as KIA while he was still very much alive. This error became a rumor, and then Wedge decided to have fun with it, creating a story where Jansen sacrificed himself so that Wedge could get away, and he told this story to Rogue Squadron initiates, after which Jansen would jump out and scare the living Osik out of them, becoming almost a rite of passage for new Rogue Squadron members. Though Skywalker eventually did return to the squadron following his duel with Darth Vader on Bespin, overall command of the rogues still fell on Wedge, as Luke would frequently detach from the squadron to perform other duties for the Alliance. But on the occasions he did fly with the rogues, he used the call sign Rogue Leader, while Wedge was relegated to Rogue One. There was no animosity over this, however, as a mutual respect and even greater friendship had developed between Wedge and Luke since their trial by fire in the Death Star trenches at Yavin. Not very long after Hoth, the Rogues received one of their first assignments as a full-fledged squadron. Rebel prisoners from Hoth were being held on an Imperial installation on the outskirts of the Maw Black Hole cluster, and after destroying the cloaking shield around the base as well as several ground patrols and guard stations, the prisoners were free, and among them, Kari Neth joined the Rogues. Rogue Squadron was quickly shunted off to Bakura, where even more rebel prisoners from the Battle of Hoth, this time scientists, were being held. Flying one of the new A/SF-01 B-Wing starfighters, Wedge and the Rogues disabled 3 fleeing Imperial transports and guarded Allied transports while they transferred the prisoners. But while the main operation was a success, Hobby's X-Wing was shot down, so Wedge stole a TIE bomber and went down to Bakura's surface to rescue him. While Wedge was busy assisting Hobby, an Imperial escort carrier had rounded up the remaining prisoners and jumped to hyperspace. Luckily, Wedge was able to glean their trajectory and track them to Geonosis, where Rogue Squadron and several support craft commenced their assault on the escort carrier. The escort carrier was captained by none other than Sarkly, whom the Rogues had assumed was taken captive and probably killed 3 years earlier. But while the Rogues managed to destroy his escort carrier, he and several of his crew made it to Geonosis' surface, where, after fighting through waves of stormtroopers and reactivated battle droids, Wedge shot down Sarkly's LAAT gunship and escaped in an old abandoned Delta 7 Aether Sprite Jedi starfighter. Subsequent raids and missions to Destrelian and Dubrillion soon followed, and after, Rogue Squadron participated in a daring raid on the Fondor shipyards, where a new Executor-class superstar destroyer, this one with a cloaking shield, was under construction. And needless to say, the Rogues made sure it never made it off the dry dock. One of the new pilots that came on board when Rogue Flight was expanded into Rogue Squadron was Shira Bree, a human female allegedly from Shallyvane, and when she needed to return to Shallyvane to pay her respects to her fallen civilization on her downtime, Luke Skywalker and 2 other rogues went to assist her, but got into some trouble with the natives, and luckily made it out alive. Bree was in all actuality a spy trained and sent by Vader himself to get as close as possible to Skywalker so she could in turn capture him, not at all from Shallyvane, and her pilgrimage was actually to a secret transmitter where she could report back to Vader. It was at this time that the Alliance became aware of a large Imperial fleet transporting a mysterious energy being known as the Teasel, which the Empire was planning on utilizing to amplify its deep space communications. So they devised a plan where, after stealing a few TIE fighters, they would attempt to infiltrate the fleet and destroy the flagship in a good old-fashioned game of asset denial. Luke, Shira Bree, and 2 other Rogue Squadron pilots, Hank Thorben and Alf, posed as Flying Bantha Squadron in their repurposed TIE fighters and initiated their attack. Once within the fleet, however, the imps caught on and started jamming their communications. With no way to identify friend or foe, Luke relied on the Force to help him target his enemies, and ended up shooting down Shira's TIE fighter in the process. Following a court-martial and a brief suspension of duty, Luke procured evidence that proved Shira was an Imperial spy all along, and was acquitted of all charges. Acting on intel from Lando Calrissian, the Rogues with Skywalker and Dash Rendar in his YT-2400 freighter, Outrider, rendezvoused with Leia Organa to try to catch Fett at unawares while repairing his ship on Gaul. However, the arrival of 2 Imperial Mark II Star Destroyers in system certainly spoiled the party. Taking on 140 TIE fighters, Rogue Squadron provided the necessary cover for the Millennium Falcon to hightail it to Gaul's surface. But once it became evident that Fett's escape could not be prevented, the Rogues were called off and returned to the Alliance fleet, suffering only 1 casualty. Following the Battle of Gaul, Luke, with assistance from the Bothan spy network, managed to recover a computer core from an Imperial transport supposedly carrying vital information on a new piece of Imperial technology, and brought it to the Bothan colony on Kothlis to have it decrypted. Before the decryption could be completed, Luke was captured by bounty hunters, and an Imperial Star Destroyer entered the system and intercepted the Alliance corvette now carrying the computer core. Escorting the Nebulon B frigate Redemption, Rogue Squadron made an attack run on the Star Destroyer, knocking out its shields and engines, sending it plummeting to Kothos' surface. And once there, the Rogues provided air support for Madine's commandos to infiltrate the wreckage and retrieve the computer core. In a final showdown on Coruscant with Black Sun leader Prince Shizor, Luke, Leia, Lando, Chewbacca, and Dash Rendar found themselves in a little pickle, and Rogue Squadron was more than happy to lend them aid, dodging Imperial TIE fighters and Black Sun Star Vipers to help guide the Millennium Falcon and Outrider to safety, although the Outrider appeared to not survive the battle. By 4 ABY, it was discovered that the computer core recovered at the Battle of Kothos contained plans for a new Death Star battle station, orbiting the forest moon of the gas giant Endor, and Rebel analysts quickly jumped into dissecting the plans to look for a weakness, while Alliance High Command began drawing up battle plans for an all-out assault on the station. Rogue Squadron went on a mission to recover an Imperial Lambda-class shuttle Tydirium from the Naval Academy at Prefspelt 4, which will prove crucial to the upcoming Endor operation, then subsequently raided Tabana gas stores on Bespin to secure the vital gas for the Alliance war effort. Back on the Alliance flagship, Home 1, Rogue Squadron was called into the main command center for a special briefing from Alliance leader Mon Mothma herself, where, alongside legendary heroes like Princess Leia Organa, Chewbacca, Generals Han Solo, Lando Calrissian, and their former commander, Luke Skywalker, the existence of a second Death Star battle station orbiting Endor's moon was revealed, and this time, the stakes were twice as high, as the Emperor himself would be on board. While Solo, Organa, Chewie, Luke, and the droids infiltrated the Imperial-occupied forest moon in the Lambda shuttle they procured on Prefspelt 4 to knock out the shield generator, Rogue Squadron would assist General Calrissian in flying into the Death Star superstructure and knocking out the reactor core directly. Ceremoniously, Antilles designated Rogue Squadron Red Squadron for the Endor operation, though this time the Rogues would be flying ad hoc style, with some members flying in Green Squadron and others in Gray Squadron, and while Antilles climbed into his X-Wing, others like Tycho Selchu chose to fly A-Wings and B-Wings for the battle. Destiny was now upon them, but as the Alliance fleet exited hyperspace, they were horrified to find the seemingly incomplete battle station was fully operational, and conducting evasive maneuvers revealed an entire Imperial fleet waiting to sandwich them. It was now up to the Rogues and the rest of the Alliance vessels to hold out until General Solo's team could take out the Death Star shield. While evading waves of TIE fighters and TIE interceptors, nicknamed Eyeballs and Squints by the pilots, General Solo's ground team finally destroyed the shield bunker guarding the Death Star 2, after which Wedge and Kier Santaj in their X-Wings, Tycho in his A-Wing, and General Calrissian as Gold Leader in the Millennium Falcon made their way into the superstructure. TIEs followed in hot pursuit into the maze of conduits and ducts, claiming Santaj's life. But luckily, Tycho managed to draw a few of the fighters off, allowing Wedge and Lando to shoot off their proton torpedoes at the Death Star's main reactor, and escaping just in time for the whole station to go up. The Battle of Endor was won. The Emperor and his servant were now dead, the Imperial fleet was in tatters after the loss of the Executor, and the Rebel Alliance was able to revel in their victory, erupting into a jubilant celebration with the native Ewoks down on the forest moon's surface, with Wedge and the members of Rogue Squadron getting their fair share of the praise. This is by far not the end of Rogue Squadron's achievements. For that, you'll have to stay tuned for my next transmission.
This transmission was commissioned by JTribs1997 on Patreon. If you have any suggestions for future transmissions, don't be afraid to drop a comment. Special thanks to my patrons, Wildcat144, Zexent, JTribs1997, Wirefox Terrier, Dave the Grave, Zim the Despot, Matt Patton, Trav, Octu274, Cal Scarata, Angry Mutt, Chris Evans, Mayo4, Moonman, Noah Shane 45, The Framinator, Logan Tyler, and Alexander Williams. If you'd like to support this channel, and perhaps even commission your own video topic, please visit my Patreon to find out how. Link is in the description. In the meantime, keep your comm channels open, for future transmissions, and don't forget to subscribe. Tad Larkin, out.